Jiu-jitsu concepts. What are they? I'm just going to list some things right off the top that are just big. If you go down this rabbit hole of jiu-jitsu concepts, you're going to run into some of these things. Let's just start with one position. I'm just going to go ahead and say half guard because I know some concepts from half guard. Right off the bat, getting a good underhook and using that to get up on the side and getting a perfect underhook position. So many people just talk about dominating with an underhook in bottom half guard. Now that might not sound quite as much like a concept like underhook. All right, ball up and get under your opponent. You know, a lot of people know that if you get your weight under your opponent's hips, you're now in a position where you can sweep them. That is a rule of a lot of sweeps. There's also a good concept that is there are 4 table legs. If you trap 2 table legs, if you get an arm and a leg, both arms, both, however you do it, if you can trap 2 out of 4 of their limbs, you have an obvious direction to sweep or to move this table. Just thinking about the art of Kazushi in general, the entire time you're in half guard, establishing grips to both break down your opponent's posture and off balance them. I could really go on a good bit from half guard, you know, using rotational hip control is something I've done a lot of lately, similar to the coyote guard. That's good enough right now, just listing a bunch of stuff from half guard, but it can get a lot further than that. Like, when you're playing on your side in half guard, you don't want to give them this space here. You see a lot of guys don't post on their elbow anymore because it's so easy to exploit that space. Keeping your head in a position where somebody can't get their head behind your head or defending, frames on things that could cross face you, like defending against the cross face being a very, very important piece. Some of these things sound more conceptual than others, but to somebody who's never really been able to think conceptually, or somebody who's like, man, I don't know if I know what these guys are talking about when they talk about jiu-jitsu concepts. I think a way I describe it that I'm sure somebody else has broken it down like this, and I'm sorry if I've heard it before like this, and I'm not giving somebody credit, is that I was thinking like a fun concept for me, like something I always like to do when I'm explaining things to people, how I play, is I like to think of these mini games in jiu-jitsu and concepts. In a way, I mean, it's kind of like, it's not really a concept to say play these mini games or isolate mini games, but in a way, that's really what thinking conceptually is. It's seeing these little mini games in the sport and then isolating them and taking them further and running with them. If you are somebody who gets out of breath more than your opponent a lot, you can quite literally isolate that game. You can spend as much time rolling just focused on not getting more worn out than your opponent, thinking about your energy output, thinking about breathing when you're, in instances where you typically hold your breath, only using the force you need to. If you're going to hit the gas pedal down all the way, do it in short little bursts instead of just redlining until you need to recover way more beyond what you are able to in the middle of a rolling round. These are all important things to think about. But the mini game concept is kind of a paradox in that it is thinking conceptually. A lot of people who break down the sport break it down into the games that make it work. And these are seen as broad concepts. And I think it throws people off to say, nah, you gotta be able to see things with a bigger picture. And in a way, what thinking conceptually does is it actually breaks things down in a narrow lens. And people who are really running on a few concepts actually have a different, more streamlined type game as far as like their vision is focused on something. But that thing that they're focused on happens to be a very important piece. It's like a thing that works in a lot of places, like energy conservation, or just efficiency of energy. That in and of itself is something when you hear people talking about jiu-jitsu concepts is breaking down, well, is it energy efficiency? Is it energy conservation? Like, what is it? At the end of the day, it's probably efficiency. If you're using a high volume of energy, you need to make sure it's wearing your opponent out more than it's wearing you out. Another idea of a concept is just the general idea of body position and alignment. And I've heard this talked about by 2 different people. The first big concept I got onto was by a guy Nick Gregoriadis. Is that how you pronounce his name? Whatever. He's a really good instructor, and I've learned a lot from his videos. He actually came to our school, and he talks about the power position. He talks about kind of like a deadlift position, maybe the bottom of a hang clean position for anyone who's lifted. But, it's almost like the appropriate kind of wrestler stance, ready to sprawl, ready to explode in, squared up, centered, good head position, all of these things. And he talks about that is the strongest area to work. And he says, if you tried deadlifting with your head this way and your leg that way, you wouldn't have any strength. And I think that he was being a little bit, he could have actually hammered it in further and explained that it's even harder to do complex movement patterns out of alignment. Like, it's very difficult to intentionally have poor alignment and then go through a yoga flow. Probably harder than it would be to deadlift with poor alignment, because I've competed in powerlifting, and that's one sport you can get strong in weird ways that don't quite make sense to a sport perspective. So when you think of things like a clean and jerk and a snatch that are very dynamic, you're kind of jumping, you're getting down under the weight quickly. It involves mobility. It involves all sorts of it's very complex. It's very dynamic. And when you think of those things, you really can't do them with poor positioning. Much, much better technique in Olympic weightlifting than powerlifting if you're going off of what this concept of power position is. Rambling on that doesn't really matter much. It actually circled around back to that concept when I got into Rob Biernacki up at Island Top Team, and I'm actually now a BJJconcepts.net member. And Rob has a system that is based off of concepts. It's influenced by Ryan Hall, some of John Danaher, other stuff, some of his own stuff, obviously. And he has an extensive program based around, not solely. I mean, it's the moves. There's all sorts of jiu-jitsu moves in there and typical drills, but he has found an art of describing things in a slightly more conceptual way. And he, talks about alignment, posture, structure, base. This is a really good one for you guys. Base, understanding what base really means. A lot of people just kind of think of it almost like your base is like that figurine standing on that circular cylinder platform, like completely centered to the ground. But your base is going to be the best positioning between the ground and your opponent, and proper alignment and angles to both receive and deliver force between the ground and your opponent. So it's ever changing depending on your opponent. There are so many different directions that you can take thinking conceptually. But I really think if you start thinking about what mini games am I playing, and just maybe pick 2 or 3 for a rolling round. I mean, I've said more than enough right now, but I mean, for instance, to really trap somebody deep in a position, get good at posting a hand maybe on an elbow. And when they go to move that elbow, you track that hand and use it as a wedge. And you could do this. I do the same thing a lot with my head to trap head and arm. The second there's space, you need to wedge it. Anything they do that moves past here, you keep that wedge. The second I give somebody an inch to create that little bit of accelerated force, they're going to be a little too strong and have a little bit too much pop to them, and they're going to be able to get out. So if you give their head an inch this way, they can create momentum, which smacks into you, which gives them more space. So if you learn how to track your opponent with your wedges and make it so they kind of can't get any sort of speedy force into your wedge, they almost have to go further into the direction that you want them to go before they can come back into you. And that's another little complex, isolated game that you can play. Sometimes a concept is just being really in tune with reading your opponent. Just defending what your opponent is trying to do to you. Maybe not the best concept just to go out and win a tournament. It might be a bit passive, but I love playing that way. I mean, when you're playing around with like somebody who's a lower rank than you, somebody a little weaker than you, it's an amazing way to get a good game going for both of you. You're just trying to deflect, get what they're doing out of the way, and they're going to come back with another try, another way. It keeps them thinking, you thinking. I guess I should just wrap the video up here now because I'm just going to keep rambling. But think of the mini games in jiu-jitsu, and you will automatically start thinking a bit more conceptually. If you don't know where to begin and you are completely novice and you're like, I know you said a lot and I know you said some specific ones, but I don't know enough about any of those. I'll tell you a good one, a good few right off the bat that I think most people can think about. Always try to keep your breath about yourself. Always breathe and keep a calm demeanor. That breath is going to make sure that you're only using the energy you need to use. Is if you just try to constantly breathe and stay relaxed in that manner. When the moments happen where you need to use energy, you will. It's almost like a stretch reflex type thing. So breathing is a lifeline. Try to think about your breathing very, very specifically in your next few days of rolling. Another concept, and I like these two for beginners because they don't interfere with the other. One of them is going to be when you are trying to get on top of somebody, you are trying to flatten them down and eliminate space from every single one of their levers and way out. So you flatten their spine down to the ground. You try to get both hips and both shoulders on the ground. And then you just try to put their structure, their limbs in places that you want them to work and keep them there. When you have side control, you make sure that your bicep is as far over into a cross-face type position as possible, that your knee is blocking their leg from coming back in. You're just getting tight to the areas in which you need to get tight and slowly eliminating more space. And then if you are on the bottom, the reverse to this general concept is always getting to a side, always trying to get some sort of shoulder and hip off the ground at all times, the same side shoulder and the same side hip, and you turn your head in that direction as well. So that right there is a good first, I don't really have a clue. Here are three things. You breathe. This is how you try to smash somebody down when you're playing top. And this is how you get up off the ground from bottom. This is very white belt stuff. I would think, as far as this is already in a lot of people's heads who don't think that conceptually. But if you don't have any idea and you're not very good at those pieces, those are three really important ones to start taking and running with it. But really anything that elbow to knee connection is a really big one. Understanding just how much this space right in here, it can be exploited. That's a really huge one. Using your elbows as frames from the bottom. Your frames to get to the hand, to get to the knee, to get to the foot. That's a common, that's a Ryan Hall thing. He has a guard concepts thing. So if you need some help and directions to go, also people-wise, you have Kit Dale, Rob Bernacki, Nick Gregoriadis. If you start typing that, I'm sure it'll come up. And then I think he's Jiu-Jitsu Brotherhood. And then, John Danaher's system is very conceptual. I don't know. There's a lot of other people. I was just listening to a guy on Daniel Strauss's podcast today, talking about how, and it's like that, the engagement grip phase. He was just saying he had different names for it, but you win the grip fight. You then create Kazushi. You break their posture and off balance them. And then there's the finish, whatever he called it. It was some, old school judo name or something. But yeah, hopefully this helps you think a bit more conceptual. And I know I kind of ADHD bounced around, but if you are somebody who kind of thinks like that and bounces around ADHD like, and you have trouble focusing in a drilling class, this is the type of thinking for you.